The Penguins made a surprising move on Thursday by re-signing goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic, and Pat and I are going to discuss that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym4Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your favorite hockey team? Well, now you can with Ultimate Hockey GM. It's completely free, and Locked On listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On NHL in the game store. And to download the game, all you have to do is visit hockeygm.app or look it up in the App Store. That's Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. So, Penguins president and general manager Kyle Dubas delivered some nice news to end your day on Thursday by re-signing goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic to a 2-year contract worth $5 million total. He'll be getting $2.5 million per year on that contract. And when I first saw that news, I was taken aback. I was stunned by it because, we had both been saying on this show for the last couple of months, ever since the season ended, that we really didn't think Nedeljkovic was going to be back with the Penguins. We thought he was probably going to price himself out of Pittsburgh. I was thinking he was maybe going to get somewhere in the $3 million range in free agency, just because when you look at this goaltender market overall for free agency, it's not that good. So I felt like at least one or two teams maybe would have given him an offer that the Penguins would not have been able to match. But that didn't happen. He comes back to the Penguins on a 2-year contract. But I will say, I do think this signing gives me more questions right now than it does answers. Specifically, what happens to Tristan Jarry now, he's still signed for 4 more years, makes $5.375 million. Is he going to be on this team heading into the season? What happens with Joel Blomqvist? Kyle Dubas really talked him up at his end of season press conference saying, there's a chance he could be ready for the start of the season. Now, we're not so sure right now, but I think we're also meant to feel like we have more questions right now compared to answers, just because this is the first in probably a lot of many moves that are still yet to come this offseason. But for Ned himself, man, really happy for him. He seems like a very stand-up guy outside of being a Cleveland Browns fan, but that's okay. We're not going to hold that against him. He played well on a prove-it contract for the Penguins this past season. And looking at that contract overall, this new one, I don't have a problem with it. And when you look at the number of money that the Penguins are spending on goaltending, it's close to $8 million. In a vacuum for most tandems, I don't have a problem with it. But for this specific tandem, I do. It has more to do, I think, with Tristan Jarry making $5.375 million, but this definitely carries some risk heading into the season. And that's where I kind of hand this over to you, Pat. What are your thoughts on this signing? And do you also have the feeling that this raises more questions right now compared to answers?
I was very surprised by this move. If for no other reason, like you said, I expected another team to throw some more money at him simply for the way he ended the season, because you look at his numbers from last year, they don't jump off the page at you. He started 33 games, 18-7 record, which again, I know wins are a team stat, but still, general managers look at that for goaltenders. He had a 297 GAA, a 902 save percentage, 1 shutout. Nothing that you can really get too excited over, but he conducted himself very well at the end of the season, with the Penguins fighting for their playoff lives, ultimately coming up short, taking over the starting job from Tristan Jarry, and doing it in a very impressive fashion, because while, again, yes, he was not spectacular, he was giving the Penguins a save or two that they might have been missing when Tristan Jarry was in net. So if you're a general manager of a mid-level team, a team that's just coming out of a rebuild, that's an enticing piece. because he's also only 28 years old. He'll be 29 around the mid-season mark. So still some hockey left to be played for him. And he certainly proved it on a prove-it deal. I also think that there's a very real world where Kyle Dubas was surprised by this, because $2.5 million for 2 years doesn't exactly seem like what he was angling for. Now, I don't think he was going to get 5 or 6 years, but 3 or 4 with a little bit more money, I figured there would be a team out there willing to pay that. To your other thing, I do think this raises a lot of questions, but we have to keep in mind it's still June. The Stanley Cup could be awarded tonight, or it could be awarded on Monday. We still have the draft. We still have free agency on July 1. There's still RFA things to be dealt with. There's going to be, I think, a lot of trades, not just with the Penguins, but with all teams in general, because when you have the salary cap go up the way it is this year, teams are going to have the ability to reshape their roster in a way they have not been able to in a very long time. But at the same time, we're going to talk more about the tandem, Tristan Jarry, and everything else later on in the show. I do think there's also a real world where this is the tandem. This is who they're going to have, because we spoke about this for the last few weeks. We wanted them to go out and get an affordable 1B backup. We thought Alex Nedeljkovic, was going to cost more, and he didn't. So maybe this is Kyle Dubas just saying, I've got a 1B. He's making $2.5 million for 2 years. He proved he can take the job if he needs to. He can take some of the workload off of Tristan Jarry. Maybe he's just going to roll the dice with this tandem.
I think that also presents a risk for this season, but also if they were to move on from Jarry, which we'll get to in a few minutes, having Blomqvist and Nedeljkovic as a tandem might be even more riskier heading into next season, because you'd be entrusting Nedeljkovic to be a number one goaltender, which he really hasn't been at any point in his career. And then you'd be entrusting Blomqvist to back him up when he's never even played an NHL regular season game. There's the other option of trading Jarry and signing a veteran in free agency, maybe someone like a Laurent Brossoit or a Kevin Lankinen, and having maybe Nedeljkovic and one of those two kind of split the starts during the season, kind of like a mini version of what Boston has been doing the past couple of years with Swayman and Ullmark, but I'm not sure the Penguins want to go down that road either. I think either of these three scenarios, Pat, they all come with varying levels of risk. And I think for this tandem, Jarry and Nedeljkovic, again, I just get nervous because what if Jarry struggles in the second half of the season once again, and then you're relying on Nedeljkovic a little bit more for next season? You saw him towards the late stages of this past season, Yeah, his record in April was good, but his save percentage dropped. His goals against average also went up, but he was winning games because the Penguins were scoring more goals. They were finally able to score 3 to 4 to 5 to maybe even 6 goals a game at times. Their offense finally woke up in the final 16 to 17 games of the season. So if they were to run this tandem back, I just get nervous because Jarry, while he starts seasons really strong, I mean, October through December, he has a combined save percentage of .923 if you do his splits, but from January to May, it goes down to .903. That just makes me a little bit nervous overall when I look at this tandem in particular. Again, in a vacuum, a tandem making this combined money of just a shade under $8 million, that's fine. But I think this particular one, it gives me some pause because I kind of see these two goalies as kind of 1B both in their own right now.
I can totally understand that. I will say this. I think that we learned as the season progressed that Mike Sullivan, as well as management, had more faith and trust in Alex Nedeljkovic than they may have early on. And it's to something that I have been saying this team needs to do next year, should they hold on to Tristan Jarry. Take his workload and lessen it early in the year. Because like you said, October to December, maybe even a little into January, he's an all-star goalie. And that's not me just making that declaration. He's made the all-star game. He is an all-star goalie.
The numbers have proven that from that time frame, October through the end of December, he plays like one of the better goaltenders in this sport.
But now that you have Nedeljkovic back and you saw the way he conducted himself at the end of the season, maybe you have more trust in him, and they should, to lessen Jarry's workload. So you play him every third or fourth game, maybe even a little sooner. Maybe you platoon them a little bit more early, keep Tristan Jarry fresh, keep Nedeljkovic fresh as well, because as you hinted, as the season progressed and he started to take over the starting job, he was starting to fade as well, but he was saved by the fact that the Penguins suddenly remembered how to score. So if you can put that all together with this tandem, you might have something, but I'm still not sold on Tristan Jarry yet. He very much has to prove it. And Alex Nedeljkovic has to prove it as well, because you look at his career numbers, his best season where he actually had some consistent playing time was the 2021 shortened season with Carolina, where he had a 932 in 23 starts. But since then, it's been 901, 895, 902. And you can chalk the other two up with Detroit to it being a bad team and not a lot going on in front of them. But last year played fine enough in a backup role. And then when he took over, he started to fade. So there are, for more reasons than one, like you said, a lot more questions than there are answers.
Agreed. And I think both goaltenders, will have to be a little bit better post All-Star break as well. You're looking at those splits, for example, with Nedeljkovic. Pre-All-Star break, he has a 2.45 goals against average and a 920 save percentage in 59 games. Post All-Star break for his career, 3.35 goals against average, 895 save percentage in 82 games played. Now, if you go to Tristan Jarry, pre-All-Star break, 121 games played, 919 save percentage, 2.42 goals against average. Post-All-Star break, 136 games, 905 save percentage, 2.95 goals against average. They both need to be better overall, I feel like, in the second half of the season if this tandem is going to work next season, if Tristan Jarry is back on this team.
For sure. And I'll get more into this in the second segment. When it comes to Jarry and it comes to Blomqvist, I think that raises even more questions, but I'll get into that here in a little bit.
Right, but I think that'll do it for this opening segment of today's episode. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to discuss a little bit more about what this means for goaltender Tristan Jarry and whether Kyle Dubas could look to trade him this offseason. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is Ultimate Hockey GM. Hey, Locked On Penguins fans, I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners, the mobile game Ultimate Hockey GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you can run the Pittsburgh Penguins better than Kyle Dubas? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is most definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead it to glory. Hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Penguins fan, you know there is no offseason. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team chances, and that's why I think you are going to absolutely love this game. Locked On Network listeners, you can get a 100% free boost to your franchise when using the promo Locked On NHL in the game store, so make sure to check it out. And to download the game, all you have to do is visit hockeygm.app. That's, again, hockeygm.app, or look it up on the App Store. That's Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So we kind of hinted at it during the first segment about what this could mean for Tristan Jarry. And I do feel like Kyle Dubas might at least listen to trade offers for Jarry this offseason. There was a report during the Jeff Merrick show on Thursday when I was tuning in with him. He was talking to Elliot Friedman, and he did say he's heard that Jarry's name has kind of been out there a little bit in trade talks already. So maybe Dubas is kind of be getting some feelers out there for Jarry. But with this re-signing of Nedeljkovic, I'll hand this over to you. Do you think this increases the chance that Tristan Jarry is not on the Pittsburgh Penguins for this upcoming season?
That's where I get a little worried, because I hinted at it in the first segment. I know everybody is excited, and I am as well, for Joel Blomqvist, because he was marvelous in the AHL this past season. He was the bona fide number one. He looks like he has a lot of talent, a lot of potential to become a solid National Hockey League goaltender. But what worries me is if you don't keep Tristan Jarry and you trade him out. Now, they may have to out of pure necessity at this point, because they've got now just about 10 million or just about 11 million in salary cap space after this signing. And they still have a ton of needs to fill. And that's going to be very difficult to do with only about $11 million in cap space. But we have now seen this on two separate occasions in the recent past. I've brought it up before, of a goalie who rides roughshod over the AHL in Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry. And then both have come up and started very strong, looked very promising, and then had some kind of a burnout. In Matt Murray's case, it was spectacular. We don't even know if he's going to be in the NHL anymore, let alone if he's ever going to get back to the level he was in 16 and 17. With Tristan Jarry, he has been fine enough, a fringe starting goalie who has a lot of inconsistencies. I don't want to go down that road with an unproven, untested goalie in Joel Blomqvist. If you're going to trade Tristan Jarry, you're going to likely have to find, like you kind of talked about in the first segment, somebody to platoon with Alex Nedeljkovic. Do I think that Blomqvist has any more to prove at the AHL level? Probably not, but I always maintain this fact. I think outside of the truly elite goalies, your Igor Shesterkins, your Sergei Bobrovskys, some UC Saros, guys like that, starting goaltenders are at their best when they have somebody behind them who could theoretically take their job. Could Alex Nedeljkovic take Tristan Jarry's job? The answer is sort of yes, because he did it last year, but when you extrapolate his numbers out through an entire season, there's not much daylight between the two of them. So I think this increases the chances simply because of cap implications, but I would be very wary of a Tristan Jarry trade if there's not another goalie either coming back or somebody you can bring on in free agency.
Right. If you do keep both heading into the season, that gives you less cap space, at least right now, because you have 10.7 million. That's according to Puckpedia. That's projected cap space overall. They still have to re-sign P.O. Joseph. Emil Benstrom is still an RFA, but again, I don't think he's coming back. But still, they now have 10.7 million projected in cap space right now. If you're able to get out of that entire Tristan Jarry contract, or at least most of it, that goes up to, the range if you retain a little bit, 13, 14 million. If you clear the entire cap hit, that's over $15 million there. You're getting close to $16 million overall. Then if you do...
Now, let's also keep this in mind. Until the season starts, you are allowed to exceed the salary cap. I can't remember the exact date, but you do have to get cap compliant by a certain day. So if, say, we're at like July 15th and the team's $2 million over the cap, there's not going to be any implications to that, and there will be other moves corresponding to get them there. But just keep that in mind, not you, but our listeners, that you are for a certain portion of the offseason allowed to exceed the salary cap limit.
Right. As long as you're below the salary cap upper limit by the start of the season, the Penguins will be totally fine overall. But just getting back to my point, yeah, I mean, right now, again, only 10.7 million projected cap space, and that is still a little bit worrying to me because of the amount of holes this team still has. Third line center to me, another middle six winger, maybe two middle six wingers, a top four defenseman on the left side. It's still quite a few holes to fill, and you don't have as much cap space right now. Obviously, I think that's going to change just because I do think someone like Riley Smith is going to get dealt, but right now they have a little less cap space overall, so they have to figure that out heading into the season. And I think you're right also. If they do trade Jarry, I would be more comfortable doing a platoon situation with a free agent like a Lankinen, like a Brossoit, like a Kaapo Kahkonen, compared to riding Blomqvist and Nedeljkovic. I think that is the riskiest scenario for the Penguins. Out of the three that we have discussed during this episode, doing a tandem of Nedeljkovic and Blomqvist carries the most risk. And this team has said that, the goal is to get back to the playoffs this year. I know they're trying to do this retool as well, but I also know they want to get back to the playoffs this year. I'm not entirely sure how you can sell that as a tandem while also being like, oh yeah, we want to get back to the playoffs. I just think that tandem overall might be a little bit too risky, even though Blomqvist could be ready for the league, but I think he might at least start out the season, maybe with getting a little more seasoning in Wilkes-Barre. We'll have to see.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, is that over a full season, we've not seen that Alex Nedeljkovic is a starter. We also know that Tristan Jarry has his warts. So I still think this is I don't want to say a problem, because I do, like I've said, I do see a world where you lessen Tristan Jarry's workload, give a little bit back to Alex Nedeljkovic, and we might be okay. Because I do think there's a very real world where Tristan Jarry just burns out. He's again, keep your pitchforks and torches down, not comparing them as goalies, just comparing the situation. It's a lot like Sergei Bobrovsky. As soon as the Panthers figured out that the guy cannot play more than, say, 50, 55 games, he became what he is right now. If you can do that with Tristan Jarry and he continues to stay 9-10, 9-15 in that range, they're in good shape. But until he proves that, we still have a lot of questions that need to be answered in the Penguins' net.
And he still needs to prove that he can maintain that for a full season. It can't just be October through the end of December and then, he comes crashing down once January starts. No, he needs to be fully consistent for a full season before I really start to trust him like I do some of these other elite goaltenders in the league. Again, I'm not calling Tristan Jarry an elite goaltender. I just want to trust him a little bit more than I do right now if he is on the team for next year. And just going back to one of your other points as well, I do think this increases the probability that he's traded, but I also don't know for sure that Kyle Dubas will actually go through with that. And I think he could also look at other players to maybe move to create more cap space to, fill out the rest of this lineup with another depth scorer, third line center, maybe a top 4 left-handed shot D, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that'll do it for the second segment. Coming up to end the show, Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final is on Friday night. Will the Florida Panthers close out the Edmonton Oilers, or will this series go back to Sunrise for a decisive Game 7 on Monday? Pat and I are going to preview that game to end the show. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our last sponsor, and that is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final will take place in Edmonton, Alberta on Friday night, as the Panthers will go for a third time to try and close out this series and win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history, while the Oilers, they'll be trying to play La Bamba at least one more time and send this series back to Sunrise. Newsflash, everyone, I love La Bamba. It puts a smile on my face every time I hear it at the end of Oilers games. It is awesome. But for the Panthers to win this game, they got to get better play out of Sergei Bobrovsky. He's kind of looked like the Columbus playoff Bob of old these last couple of games. He needs to get back to the level that he's played at for most of these playoffs outside of these last 2 games if the Panthers want to win this one. I think their penalty kill also has to be a bit better as well. And I also want to see them kind of carry over their play in the second half of Game 5 to this one. The Panthers, I felt like, were outplaying the Oilers for the final 30 to 32 minutes of Game 5. Let's see if they can repeat that in Game 6. And obviously for Edmonton, Connor McDavid's got to keep doing his thing, man. He's been tremendous these last 2 games, 8 points during that time in these last 2 games. I also think Leon Draisaitl has to be better outside of Game 4. He's been very quiet in this series. I do want to also see more out of Zach Hyman. Nugent Hopkins, I think, has to be better. And who knows, maybe Edmonton will continue getting some depth scoring. Their depth has really stepped up in this series overall. But I guess we'll try this again, Pat. Do the Panthers close this out tonight, or are we going back to Sunrise for a Game 7?
My heart says Edmonton does it. My heart says Edmonton wins tonight. They keep the momentum going, and we get a comeback for the ages and see a Game 7 on Monday night that nobody could have possibly predicted. but my head says this is not going to happen because you brought up a good point. The second half of game 5 was all Panthers. They looked like the team that was there games 1 through 3. They looked like the better team. They looked like they had the juice. They just dug themselves such a deep hole in that game. They were not going to be able to climb out of it. If they're able to carry that over to tonight, I think they can close this out. I will say this, though, to build off of something else you said. Edmonton has pretty much been carried by Stuart Skinner, who has played extremely well. Let's make sure he gets the love he deserves. He has been very good these last few games. Some depth scoring in Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, RNH, Zach Hyman haven't really been a part of this. They've chipped in, but they haven't looked like the dominating force that they have been throughout the playoffs. If those guys decide to show up and join Connor in this comeback effort, that might be trouble for Florida because the depth has been there for Edmonton in the last few games. But if the big guns show up and all of a sudden they're getting contributions up and down the lineup, that could spell trouble for Florida. And we might be talking about game 7 on Monday when we come back for a new episode. So I do think at the end of the day, if you look at the trend lines of how this series has gone, Florida closes this out tonight. They win their first Stanley Cup. I always think of what was it called? All Access Road to the Stanley Cup in 2016. What Sullivan said as he walked out of the locker room before the first period in San Jose when they ultimately won, where he just said, let's get this done. Enough is enough. I think Florida is thinking, let's get this done. Enough is enough.
I hear you. I've been going back and forth on this. I really think it's a 50-50 coin flip. I mean, I picked the Panthers in 7 before this series started. So with that, I think I might lean towards the Oilers tonight, but I also could be flat out wrong with that prediction, just like I was wrong in game 5 when I predicted the Panthers to close it out. I mean, this is going to be one for the ages. I really think so. I mean, I
picked Edmonton in 7, yep, and I've been jokingly saying it, and it's starting to suddenly look real. You got to lose 3 to win in 7, and they've lost their 3, and they're still alive.
Hey, I mean, I picked the Panthers in 7. They've only lost 2 so far. Even if they lose tonight, I still have that Panthers in 7 prediction overall. But I really do feel like all the pressure is on the Panthers right now. You don't want that doubt in your mind if you lose this game heading back to Sunrise where you have a game 7 and anything could happen. You don't want that doubt of, oh my God, we're 1 loss away from getting reverse swept, which hardly ever happens in the Stanley Cup playoffs overall. So
I think that's a little bit of an X factor for Edmonton is that they're going into tonight's game like we're in friendly confines. Our fans are going to be jacked up. And guess what? We've been doing this for a week now. We've been staring down elimination for a week now. This is nothing we haven't already done. And you know that Florida's got that little bit of a voice in their head right now saying, oh my God, are we going to be the team that blows this? Are we going to be the team in the history books that blew a 3-0 series lead in the modern era of the Stanley Cup Final? They might start gripping their sticks a little bit tighter. In Edmonton, they're going to be in a place where they can play a little bit looser tonight, and they don't really have much to lose. Yes, I know they can lose the Stanley Cup, but they've been doing this for a week now. This is nothing they haven't experienced.
And also, the Oilers have been a different team when either A, they have a chance to eliminate a team, or B, they're facing elimination. They're 6-0 when facing elimination or having the chance to eliminate teams in the playoffs, and they're averaging 4.5 goals for per game, and they're only allowing 1.8 goals against per game in those games. This team
talking me into it.
Yeah, this team really turns it on in game 6. I'm also leaning towards the Oilers, but I'm also just hoping for a very good game 6 tonight. I can't wait to sit down and watch it overall. But that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. We will be back with another episode with you all on Monday, though I will be in a very different place. I'm heading to the beach this Sunday, and I will be there for the next 6 days. So I'll be back next Saturday. I won't be on every episode next week. I'll be on at least 2 or 3 of the episodes. The other 2, I'm going to leave to Pat to record. And I know he has at least one guest coming on next week that you guys are going to be very excited about. But whenever something happens next week, if the Penguins make a trade or something happens, we'll have some emergency video / audio episode out for you all pretty quickly after. I'll rush back from the beach if it happens while I'm on the beach reading my book, or somehow I'm in the ocean or something like that. But I'll be on for a couple of the episodes next week, but the other episodes Pat will be doing solo as I head to the beach with my girlfriend and a couple of our friends, Becky and Dan. Becky and Dan, you guys probably aren't listening to this episode, but if you are, shout out to you guys. We're excited to go to the beach with you all for the next week. But again, that will do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We'll be back with another episode for you all on Monday.